I sometimes wonder if the smell of oil is the only thing that keeps my memory tethered to the earth. When you get to be my age, the past becomes a fluid thing, leaking out like coolant from a cracked radiator, pooling in places it shouldn't, drying up in others. But the smell, that stays. In September of 1944, the world smelled of wet canvas, stale tobacco, and the sharp, metallic tang of gun oil. I was sitting on a crate in a drafty hangar in Lincolnshire. Or maybe it was Leicestershire. The airfields all blur into one gray stretch of tarmac now, with a Lee Enfield rifle across my knees. To the other lads, the weapon was a tool for killing. To me, it was a collection of springs, bolts, and machine tolerances. I stripped it down not because it was dirty, but because the logic of it soothed me. The bolt head, the extractor, the firing pin. They fit. If they didn't fit, you filed them until they did. There was a cause and an effect. You pull the trigger, the sear releases, the spring expands. Simple, predictable. My hands moved over the steel without conscious thought. These were mechanics' hands, scarred from slipping wrenches and burnt by exhaust manifolds long before they ever held a grenade. Back in Coventry, before the world went mad, those hands knew the temperament of a Morris 8 engine better than they knew the touch of a woman. There was a comfort in the grease of the garage, a sanctuary in the physics of internal combustion. An engine doesn't hate you. It doesn't want to kill you. It just works or it breaks, and if it breaks, you fix it. But you can't fix a city that's been turned to ash. The memory hit me then, sitting in that damp hangar, just as hard as it hits me now. The low, thrumming vibration of the C-47 engines warming up on the runway outside began to bleed into the sound of the Heinkels over Warwickshire. I was back in the cellar. 1940. The air pressure dropping so sharply it made your ears pop before the sound even arrived. The ground didn't just shake. It rippled. That was the thing nobody told you about the Blitz, the way solid earth turned to liquid. I remembered staring at the ceiling beams, calculating the load-bearing stress, knowing that if a 500-pound bomb hit the terrace above, the math wouldn't matter. The physics of destruction had no rules I could repair. I was helpless, just a man in the dark, waiting for the roof to cave in. I snapped the bolt of the Enfield back into place. The metal clack was sharp, cutting through the drone of the planes. It was a small act of control. I could control the rifle. I couldn't control the war. Art you going to wear that steel wool down to a nub? It was Davy, a kid from Leeds with a smile that looked too big for his face. He was checking his webbing for the 10th time. I didn't answer him, just wiped a smudge of carbon from the receiver. They told us this was the big one. Operation Market Garden. The brass said we'd be home by Christmas. They painted a picture of a straight drive into Germany, hopping over bridges like stones across a pond. It sounded like a sales pitch for a used car with a cracked block, too good to be true, shiny on the outside, rot underneath. I didn't trust it. You don't end a war with a schedule. You don't fix a catastrophic failure by rushing the job. But I wasn't an officer. I was a mechanic who had somehow found himself wearing a red beret. I stood up, slinging the rifle. The weight of the parachute harness felt wrong, heavy in all the wrong places. It wasn't like a tool belt. It was a shroud. I checked the straps. Just strap tight. Leg straps tight. The quick-release box. I ran my thumb over the locking pin. If this mechanism failed, gravity would win. I checked it again and again. The other men were laughing, nervous, high-pitched barks of bravado, smoking cigarettes down to the filter. I just kept tracing the stitching on the nylon risers. I needed to know the system held. If I could understand the mechanism of the fall, maybe I wouldn't be so terrified of the landing. The order came to board. We waddled out onto the tarmac, weighed down by kit bags, weapons, and ammunition. The noise was absolute, the roar of hundreds of radial engines drowning out thought. We climbed into the belly of the Skytrain, packing in like sardines in a tin can. The fuselage smelled of vomit and high-octane fuel. As we taxied, the vibration rattled my teeth. I closed my eyes and tried to visualize the pistons firing in the engines on the wings. Intake, compression, combustion, exhaust. Intake, compression, combustion, exhaust. A rhythm, a heartbeat. Then we were airborne. The English countryside fell away, replaced by the gray chop of the Channel, and then, eventually, the flat expanse of the Netherlands. Time distorted. It felt like hours. It felt like seconds. I was sweating, the wool of my uniform itching against my neck. My stomach churned, not from air sickness, but from that old, familiar dread. The helplessness. I was strapped to a bench in a flying metal tube, hurtling towards an enemy who had turned my hometown into a brickyard. There was nothing to fix here, nothing to tune. The crew chief stood up near the open door. The wind whipped his headset cord. He held up fingers. 4 minutes. I looked at the man opposite me. He was praying, his lips moving silently. I checked my static line hook. Snap fastener engaged. Wire rope intact. It was the only prayer I knew. The red light by the door glowed like a demon's eye. We stood up, shuffling toward the exit, the floor shifting under our boots. Hook up, the command was screamed over the wind. I clipped the static line to the cable. I gave it a tug. It held. Action stations. The air rushing past the open door screamed. It sounded like the sirens. It sounded like Coventry burning. My heart hammered against my ribs like a piston rod about to throw. I didn't belong here. I belonged under a chassis. Wrench in hand, safe in the grease. The light turned green. Go, the man in front of me vanished. I shuffled forward, the wind tearing at my tunic. I reached the door, placed my hands on the sides, cold aluminum, and threw myself into the void. The slipstream caught me, a physical blow that tumbled me head over heels. The roar was deafening, a chaotic assault on the senses. Then, the violent jerk of the canopy opening. The harness dug into my groin and shoulders, bruising instantly. And then, silent. It is the silence I remember most about the drop. After the roar of the engines and the wind, the sudden quiet was jarring. I was hanging in the air, drifting over a patchwork quilt of green and brown. It looked peaceful. It looked like a painting. I looked up at the canopy, white silk, fully inflated. The lines were not twisted. The mechanism worked. I breathed the cold air filling my lungs. For a moment, just a moment, the fear evaporated. I was a part of a machine that was functioning perfectly. I looked down. The ground was rushing up to meet me. I bent my knees, elbows in, chin on chest. The drill took over. I hit the Dutch soil hard, rolling to disperse the energy. Shoulder, hip, back. I came to rest in a furrow of plowed earth. It smelled of damp clay and fertilizer, richer than English soil. Heavier. I lay there for a second, staring at the sky where hundreds of other shoots bloomed like white flowers. I was alive. I wasn't helpless. I sat up and immediately began the ritual. Release the harness. Twist the dial. Hit it. The straps fell away. I pulled my rifle from its valise. Bolt back. Check the chamber. Clear. Bolt forward. Safety on. I checked my pockets. Grenades, ammo, wrench. Yes, I carried a small adjustable wrench. Superstition. Maybe. Or maybe I just needed to know I could tighten a nut if I had to. Jenkins. You alive? It was Sergeant Miller, crouching by a hedgerow. Engines running, Sarge, I called back, my voice sounding thin in the open air. We formed up. The unit was scattered, but we coalesced quickly, drawn together by training and the desperate need for company. We began the march toward Arnhem. The sun was out now, weak and watery. We walked past farmhouses with thatched roofs. Civilians came out, waving orange flags, handing out apples. It was surreal. We were walking to a war, but it felt like a parade. I kept my eyes scanning, not the crowds, but the machinery of the landscape. The windmills, the tractors, the telegraph poles. My brain sought patterns. If I could understand the layout, I could survive it. But the Dutch countryside was a deceptive thing. It had its teeth. We were moving through a wooded area. The Wolf has forest, I think. The trees were tall. The light dappled. It was quiet, too quiet. The sort of quiet you get right before a timing belt snaps. Then the air split open. It wasn't a bang. It was a ripping sound, like canvas being torn by a giant hand. Leaves shredded above our heads. Bark exploded. Down, get down, I hit the dirt, the taste of leaf mold filling my mouth. The logic of the morning vanished. This was chaos. Bullets didn't follow straight lines. They ricocheted, they tumbled. The MG-42 Spandau, we called it, was firing from a concealed position ahead. The rate of fire was terrifying, a continuous stream of lead that pinned us to the earth. Get the Bren up. Suppress that bastard, Miller screamed. To my right, Davy was struggling with the Bren gun. He was prone, fumbling with the magazine. He pulled the trigger. Nothing. He racked the charging handle. It's jammed, he shrieked, panic rising in his voice. It won't fire, the German machine gun traversed, chewing up the ground inches from Davy's face. He curled into a ball, the useless weapon beside him. He was helpless. Something in me clicked. The fear was there, screaming in the back of my skull, but the mechanic stepped forward. A jammed gun wasn't a death sentence. It was a mechanical failure. It was a blockage in the fuel line. It was a stuck valve. I crawled over to him, the bullet singing high and angry above me. Give it here, I snapped. It's broken, Art. We're dead, shut up. It's a machine. I grabbed the hot barrel, ignoring the sting. I popped the rear pin. The receiver slid open. I saw it instantly. A rim of a cartridge had sheared off, wedging the bolt carrier. A dirty extraction. I dug my knife out, the blade shaking only slightly, and pried the brass shard loose. I wiped the bolt face with my thumb, slamming the mechanism back together. It took 10 seconds. In the garage, that was nothing. In the woods, it was a lifetime. I shoved the gun back into Davy's hands. Gas regulator is set too low for this grime. Open it up 1 click. Now fire. Davy looked at me, eyes wide, then nodded. He adjusted the regulator. He pulled the trigger. The Bren roared to life, its slow, rhythmic answering the German buzzsaw. The enemy fire faltered. Good man, Art. Good man, Miller yelled. I didn't smile. I just wiped the oil from my hands onto my trousers. I had fixed it. I had imposed order on the chaos. We pushed forward, the firefight dissolving into a skirmish. Then silence again as the Germans pulled back. We felt invincible. We had taken the hit and kept moving. The optimism of the briefing room returned. Maybe we would be home by Christmas. Then the mortar fell. There was no whistle, no warning, just a sudden, bone-jarring compression of the atmosphere. The ground erupted 20 yards to my left, a fountain of black earth and white smoke. I was thrown sideways, my ears ringing with a high-pitched whine. I shook my head, trying to clear the dizziness. Sound off, I yelled, my voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. I looked to where the explosion had been. There was a crater, and near the crater, a boot, just a boot. I scrambled over. It was the lad from the plane, the one who had been praying, the one whose name I hadn't even learned yet. He was gone, not injured, gone. The physics of the mortar bomb had simply erased him. I stood there, staring at the smoking earth. The Bren gun fix didn't matter. My wrench didn't matter. You couldn't repair this. The illusion of control I had built since landing shattered. This wasn't a machine. This was a slaughterhouse. The order came to move out. We left the crater behind. We pushed on towards the bridge, but the spring in our step was gone. The sky was turning a bruised purple as evening set in. The sounds of battle were intensifying ahead, heavy thuds of artillery, the grind of tracks. We reached the outskirts of Oosterbeek. We dug in near a railway embankment. I set up a perimeter, my hands trembling now. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a cold residue of dread. Sergeant Miller was by the radio, the handset pressed to his ear. His face was pale, illuminated by the red glow of a cigarette. He wasn't shouting orders anymore. He was listening. He lowered the radio slowly and looked at us. XXX Corps is stopped, he said, his voice flat. They're stuck on the road. And the bridge is blocked. I looked at the faces around me. Dirty, tired, young. What about the drop zones? Someone asked. Overrun, Miller said. We're cut off. Jerry is moving in from the west and the east. I looked out into the gathering dark. The horizon was flickering with muzzle flashes. We weren't the hammer anymore. We were the anvil. The logic of the invasion had failed. The schedule was broken. I gripped my rifle, feeling the cold steel, but it offered no comfort now. I was back in the cellar in Coventry, listening to the world fall apart above me. And there wasn't a single thing I could do to stop it. We were trapped. The perimeter at Oosterbeek wasn't a line on a map anymore. It was a strangulation. We were compressed into a thumbprint of suburbia, trapped between the river and the rail line. The noise was constant, a physical weight that pressed down on your chest. We were out of food. We were out of water. But worst of all, we were out of ammunition. The radio man, Miller, took a piece of shrapnel to the throat an hour after the news about the bridge. Now the set just hissed static, a dead line to a dead world. The boys holding the crossroads were vital. If they fell, the Germans would pour into the tennis courts, where the wounded were stacked like firewood. They sent a runner. I watched him die. He didn't even make it across the street before the machine gun cut him down. I sat in the mud, staring at my hands, grease-stained, trembling. The same hands that had fixed misses. Higgins Austin 7 back in Coventry. Here, they were useless. I couldn't fix a severed artery. I couldn't tune a battle plan. The helplessness rose up like bile. It was the cellar all over again, the ceiling shaking, the dust falling, waiting for the bomb that had your name on it. Then, through the smoke, I saw the shape. A Zündapp motorcycle combination. German. It was nose down in a drainage ditch, the sidecar flooded. A few yards away lay the burning skeleton of a jeep. My vision tunneled. The mortars, the screaming, the smell of cordite, it all receded. I didn't see wreckage. I saw components. I saw a magneto. I saw a fuel line. I saw a solution. I didn't run. I crawled, sliding over the wet earth. Bullets snapped the twigs above my head, but I was already somewhere else. I was in the workshop. I reached the bike. The electrics were shredded, copper wire hanging like guts. I stripped the casing with my teeth. I needed a bridge for the spark. I looked at the Jeep. The fuel line was intact. I worked with a feverish, terrified precision. My fingers, usually clumsy with cold, were flying, twist, crimp, tighten. It was a mechanical prayer. But to reach the carburetor, I had to move the driver. He was still there, slumped over the tank. I grabbed his shoulder and pulled. He turned heavily, his helmet falling off. He was a boy, blonde, smooth-faced, no older than me. His eyes were open, blue and clouded, staring at nothing. For a second, my hands froze. This wasn't scavenging metal. This was grave robbing. I was stealing the enemy's breath to save my own. I pushed him into the mud. The mechanic in me took over. The soldier died right there, replaced by something colder, something pragmatic. I finished the splice. I loaded the sidecar with the last crates of ammunition we had. I straddled the seat. It was slick with rain and blood. I found neutral. I gripped the throttle. I kicked the starter. The engine didn't just start. It exploded into life. A raw guttural bark that cut through the battle noise. It was the loudest thing in the world. I was sitting on a beacon, screaming my position to every German gunner in the sector. The crossroads were 200 yards away. 200 yards of open, killing ground. I revved the engine, feeling the vibration in my bones. It was time to move. I dropped the clutch and the back wheel spun, biting into the wet cobblestones. The bike fishtailed, then surged forward. I didn't look left or right. I looked at the road surface. Pothole, debris, corpse, swerve. The air around me came alive. The snap of supersonic rounds passing inches from my ear was constant. Sparks flew from the handlebars as a bullet grazed the metal. I hunched low, trying to make myself small, merging with the machine. I wasn't Arthur Jenkins from Coventry anymore. I was a piston. I was a gear. I was part of the mechanism. The engine roared a defiant. angry sound that drowned out my own terror. I skidded into the crossroads position, the sidecar wheel lifting off the ground. I killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. Men stared at me from their foxholes, eyes wide, faces gray with exhaustion. They didn't cheer. They just grabbed the ammo crates. I became the scavenger. I didn't stop. I rode that death trap back through the gauntlet, ferrying 2 wounded men who would have died in the dirt. I fixed the fuel line twice with tape and wire. I kept it running because if the machine stopped, the reality would catch up with me. But ingenuity doesn't win wars. Numbers do. The perimeter collapsed. We were ordered to withdraw. I rode the Zündapp to the river's edge. The Rhine was black and swollen with rain. I couldn't take the bike. I patted the tank, a gesture to a faithful beast, and pushed it over. It sank into the mud. I swam. I left the war in that water, but I brought the cold home with me. 70 years later, I stand in my garage. It's quiet here. The tools are outlined on the pegboard. The floor is swept clean every night. My family thinks I'm just a tidy old man. They don't know that the order is a barricade. If I leave a wrench out, if I let the clutter accumulate, the feeling comes back. The helplessness, the knowledge that the world can break faster than you can fix it. I still flinch when a car backfires in the street. It's not a noise to me. It's the sound of the Zündapp stalling. It's the sound of the gap between life and death closing. I spent my life fixing engines, toasters, lawnmowers, trying to prove to myself that things can be repaired. But I know the truth. The Coventry I grew up in is a memory. The boy who went to Arnhem is a ghost. You can patch a radiator, you can weld a chassis, but you cannot mend a soul that has been cannibalized by survival. The machine is broken forever. We think of war as a test of strength. It's not. It's a test of ingenuity. In the middle of chaos, you have to find the one thing you can still control, the one problem you can still solve. For me, it was an engine. For you, it'll be something else. Find your wrench. Find your purpose when all seems lost. That's not just how you survive a war, it's how you survive life. This memory is a shard of glass I carry. Help me pull it out. Subscribe to keep this history alive.